Let me just begin by, again, expressing publicly my condolences to the families of the 9/11 attack and to extend my prayers and support for them and my wishes that this commission, as the Joint Intelligence Committees before it, does not only find some answers, but certainly recommendations for change and improvement, many of which have already been undertaken, so that this type of awful, horrific, human and personal tragedy never affects anyone else. I wanted to just make a couple of points. I certainly appreciate the work of the staff and the report of the executive director, and maybe not addressing all the details of what has been a very careful review of the FBI operations, certainly prior to September 11th and thereafter, and a very good audit with respect to many of the programs and operations. I would like to talk about some larger general issues and certainly then engage in whatever questions you want. I think the point that I would like to make is that it is imperative, in my view, that the Commission distinguish between the period before September 11th and the period after September 11th. That this is, I would respectfully suggest, a central question for the Commission and for the American people. And I think the inability to focus on that question leaves not only a lot of speculation, but I think a lot of misinformation about some of the activities and some of the dynamics here involved. I guess my view is that al-Qaeda declared war on the United States in 1996. That's when bin Laden issued his first fatwa. The 1998 fatwa was much more specific. It directed his followers to kill Americans anywhere. That was followed by attacks against American soldiers in Yemen in 1992, which was actually the subject of a Southern District of New York FBI indictment returned in June of 1998, prior to the attacks against the embassies in East Africa. The attacks upon the American soldiers in Somalia, Project Restore Hope, was an activity sponsored by and directed by al-Qaeda soldiers. That, as you know, was one of the overt acts publicly identified in the New York City indictment with respect to bin Laden. The attacks against the embassies in 1998, acts of war against the United States. The attacks against our warship in 2000, acts of war against the United States. I remember briefing Senator Kerry and Senator Shelby after one of these attacks. It was the embassy attacks, and he asked me a very good question, a question that I think is maybe more relevant today than it was then. And he said, why is the FBI over in East Africa, hundreds of FBI agents sifting through a crime scene, maintaining chain of custody, talking to people and giving them their Miranda rights, when this is an act of war against the United States? And my response then, as it would be now, is that absent a declaration of war back by the United States against al-Qaeda, against this very competent and very dangerous terrorist organization, we were left with the tools that were available to fight terrorism and to neutralize and incapacitate not just bin Laden, but many of his operatives and allied organizations. The point there is not that anybody in the FBI or anybody in the United States thought that investigating these cases was the best response to a war that was declared against the United States. You could poll any FBI agent, any jury that tried and convicted many of the people in these cases, and they would tell you absolutely not. An arrest warrant, 2 of them for bin Laden in the Southern District of New York, was not going to deter him from what happened on September 11th. But the point of these investigations was, in the absence of invading Afghanistan, in the absence of armed Predator missiles seeking out our enemies, in the absence of all the things that were appropriately done after September 11th, when the United States declared war back on al-Qaeda, we were left with alternatives which were better than no alternatives. And as I said in my statement, sometimes they worked. And the investigations were not investigations that dealt with individuals. When the FBI investigated La Cosa Nostra, it wasn't investigating a particular person or group of people. It was investigating the organization and the enterprise. The purpose there was to get as much information as possible to incapacitate the leadership and dissolve the organization. The Watergate investigation would be the same example of that. These investigations were not cases. They were initiatives that were designed to gather information. So before September 11th, most of the information that was residing in the United States government with respect to al-Qaeda came from FBI investigations, not from intelligence operations, not from collection. It came from the cooperating witnesses that we found in 1993 after the World Trade bombing in February. The FBI conducting an investigation, but an investigation that went to the identification of the people who might have been involved in supporting that attack, led to, if you recall, the prevention, I stress that word, the prevention of a second major terrorist attack against the United States in New York City, which was called the Day of Terror. And the organization was going to blow up tunnels and bridges in the United Nations and federal office buildings, killing potentially thousands and thousands of Americans. It was the investigation of the World Trade Tower that prevented that, and also gave us an arrest warrant for one Ramzi Youssef. Ramzi Youssef related to Sheikh Khalid Mohammed, one of the architects of the September 11th attack. He was found in Pakistan, staying in an al-Qaeda guest house by FBI agents who had an arrest warrant. And without that arrest warrant, he would never have been brought back to the United States. Why was it important to have an arrest warrant? Because incapacitating him would prevent him from further attacks against the United States. As you know, in 1995, he and others, Sheikh Khalid Mohammed being one of them, were planning to blow up 12 U.S. airliners over the Pacific Ocean, killing hundreds of Americans. That was aborted due to a series of events, but precisely the FBI criminal investigation served to prevent that from happening. My point is that these investigations are projects that seek to gather maximum amount of information so the organization can be stopped from committing future acts of terrorism. It was never our notion in the FBI that criminal prosecutions of terrorists and investigations of their organizations was a substitute for military action, for foreign policy action, for the United States doing what it did on September 11th, declaring war on an enemy that had declared war on us many years ago. The point of it is that these investigations, as they existed, prevented acts of terrorism. With very limited resources, the FBI, as you know, before September 11th, had 3.5% of the federal government's anti-terrorism budget. And it's no news to anybody that for many, many years, as your executive director recounted, the resource issue and the legal authority issue certainly limited what we were able to do before September 11th. In the budget years 2000, 2001, 2002, we asked for 1,895 people, agents, linguists, analysts. We got a total of 76 people during that period. That's not to criticize the Congress. It's not to criticize the Department of Justice. It is to focus on the fact that that was not a national priority. It's to repeat what we saw in the 2000 presidential election. Terrorism was not discussed. This was not an issue that the candidates talked about, that the American people talked about during that period. And this was right after the attack on the USS Cole. For many, many years, a lack of these resources, and maybe more importantly, a lack of legal authority, prevented us from doing what was easily done after September 11th. The Patriot Act the November 18, 2002 decision by the Court of Review, which threw out a 20-year interpretation of the FISA statute. The court said to the judges, to the Department of Justice, to the FBI, to the intelligence community, you've been misreading the statute for 20 years. Not only does the Patriot Act provide for this, but the actual statute provides for that. So this wall that had been erected was a self-erected wall by the United States government, confirmed by interpretations by the FISA court, but when challenged for the first time in 20 years, was found by the Court of Review to be inconsistent with the statute as well as inconsistent with the Constitution. All of these things being said, the point I guess I want to make to you this morning, and which I tried to make in my statement, is that we had a very effective program with respect to counterterrorism before September 11th, given the resources, in my view, and given the authorities that we had. Bin Laden was indicted in June of 1998. He was indicted again after the African bombings. He was put on our top 10 list. George Tenet and I reviewed plans to have him arrested and taken into custody in Afghanistan and brought back to the United States. I went over to see then Chief Executive Musharraf in 2002 and made the case for him that this person be thrown out of Afghanistan, that he help us take him into custody so we could bring him back to the United States. All of the other things that were being done in a limited framework, given, again, lack of resources and maybe more importantly, the legal authorities that we had to live with.
If you could wrap up now, your time's up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The final point I think I want to make then is that we can change the law, we can pass new statutes, we can add billions of dollars to the fight. We need to keep in perspective, however, what was the reality before September 11th, what was the reality thereafter. And at the end of the day, the FBI, as a part of the Department of Justice, has to obey the law. And whatever that law is, it's one that protects us, it protects our Constitution, it also protects our people. And that law can change, but I think we have to keep in mind that when that changes, we can't judge what happened in the past by different standards.